So thank you for the invitation. It is an honor to be part of this ACPA Presidential Symposium and to be sharing this space with brilliance and outstanding scholars. Before I start, I want to clarify that I am not a president or employed by Anchor. As after this announcement invitation was published on social media, I got multiple texts or calls or even messages via social media asking me since when I was appointed. However, I do volunteer my time as founding editor for the journal Committed to Social Change on Race and Ethnicity, published by the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. And I volunteer my time to work with Anchor staff and their membership in order to advance, improve, support, and create opportunities to publish research, policy, and best practices and procedures with an emphasis on race and ethnicity in American higher education. As we were in the process of developing the journal, we interviewed and surveyed practitioners and scholars in the United States, and many of them stated that the research oftentimes gets rejected by the stream journals because their research focused on race and ethnicity. So there was a need to create another outlet. Here. Okay. I want to know that through the next 10 to 15 minutes, I will be speaking mostly in English, but once in a while I'll speak in Spanglish and other times in Spanish. I might not translate it, so I'm sorry if you are uncomfortable. And actually, I'm not sorry, but I've been uncomfortable many times. This is to recognize that we live in a multilingual educational system. Many of our students and their families speak other language than just English. And oftentimes we forget about their various forms of knowledge. When I speak in Spanglish and Spanish, I hope to advocate for communities of people that do not have access to formal education, for those that speak various languages, and for those that do not speak English. And as oftentimes, some of these communities do not have access to the power of academia and of information, and whose lived experiences are not acknowledged and captured in this medium, and who by large have been marginalized and forgotten in research. I also recognize that there are multiple languages, and in this talk, I don't acknowledge all of them, or most of them, right? As student affairs practitioners and scholars, we cannot remove ourselves from what students represent. We must socialize current and future student affairs practitioners to learn with and from their students, to create educational programming that represents their familial and cultural identities, and to continue to engage with the students' communities and to learn the terminology used in their cultural and individual spaces instead of us applying terms that doesn't represent them. As I read the student personnel point of view from 1949, I thought about the foundational document does not addresses undocumented students, LGBTQ plus students, homeless students, community colleges, language, gender, race, ethnicity, among other racial and social justice topics that are relevant to us and have been relevant to us for years. To start the document stated earlier, it only provides examples by using the pronouns of he, him, and his, a very male-centric document, but also it refers to the United States as the world of power on page 20. As I read the student personnel point of view, I reflect on my own experiences of oppression in student affairs. For example, during my undergraduate career, my college experience, I ran for student body president and I received an anonymous threat saying, "Take your name off the ballot before you get hurt. We do not want a Mexican or fag as student body president." And as a matter of fact, they misspelled my name. In graduate school, I continued to face similar themes of subjection from my peers, faculty, and institution. Because of my accent and my immigration story, I was always reminded that I wouldn't be successful in a PhD program. So thank you again for the invitation. But now as a scholar, my comments at academic conferences have been dismissed multiple times. Not too long ago, I was invited to give a lecture on diversity at an institution, and someone on my audience stood up and said, "You're stupid." My first reaction was to say, "What makes you believe that?" His comment back was, "Because you have an accent." As I was preparing for this presentation today, I also lived in fear, because thinking that some of my comments will be dismissed. There are just a few examples of my own lived experiences, but I know that many students, student affairs practitioners, and faculty of color that continue to face racism and oppression in various ways. We must acknowledge that our programming and research done in higher education continues to marginalize our students. And we know that educational programming and research has never been neutral, and it can be used as a political act. And if we do not address the racism, oppression, and marginalization that has been embedded in student affairs and research, then power, privilege, and white supremacy stays intact, resetting problematic and even understandings of systematic, long-standing forms of oppression at the institutional, cultural, and individual level. If we don't do this work that aims to address the student personnel points of views through a racial and social justice lens, then who will? If I, you, and others don't advocate for students that sound and look like me, then who will? I also want to acknowledge that I entered this conversation with some privilege, or a lot of privilege, including my male privilege, multilingual, and my formal educational training. I arrived to Nebraska from Mexico, and through my educational experiences, I learned that I needed different languages and codes to communicate with others and myself. A secret language that brings me closer to reflection, to my family, my friends, and my own research. Now I speak academic, standard English and Spanish, working class slang, Chicano, Spanglish, and Zacatecano dialect. I recognize that my voice has been lost in the history of my culture, and my ancestors in the United States has been attempted to be erased. Yet I understand that with my PhD and by simply being part of this panel, I continue to fight to reclaim my own voz de poder, my own powerful voice. So I use the metaphors that I wrote in 2017 and is published in the International Journal of Qualitative Studies in Education. The concept of voices translates into English into voices. And it represents one of the most important rights and democratic principles for individuals. It is a continuous process that involves reflection, pain, fear, and hope. A process through which one can create and share knowledge. But I also acknowledge that in this metaphor of voices, it doesn't have to be a sound or verbal. People show their resistance in various forms. And for example, in our programming, some students might show might not show up to some of our programming or might step out of our programming. So Voces Perdidas characterizes the unheard and lost voices, the narratives that have been forgotten and rejected by a system that only recognizes our voces de poder, which are powerful voices, that overshadows those with little to no political, social, economic, and academic capital. Voces de poder dominates academia and silences non-English speakers, communities of colors, and those that do not have access to higher education and scholarship. Voces Perdidas have been lost through history due to the political, economic, and social injustice for marginalized communities of people. The experience of faculty and staff of color can be analyzed from these both perspectives. As scholars have created new theories to help analyze the social identities and lived experiences of Latin American students that many other theories cannot or do not attempt to do so. For example, some scholars of color have earned terminal degrees through formal education, and that can be considered a voz de poder, as they have gained access to academia, political capital, and the ability to deconstruct, create, and sometimes publish. Latin American scholars have created new theories as a form of liberatory practice to help analyze issues and realities that other theories cannot and do not do so, like issues around language, ethnicity, culture, immigration, identity, among many others. For example, we have the Latina feminist group that created the Testimonios, Gloria Saldúa, that wrote on autohistorias, counter-stories by Delgado, Solorzano y Yoso, Sentipensante and Validation Theory by Laura Rendon, Latino Critical Theory, are just some examples of those theories that have evolved as a form of liberatory practice. But various scholars have used these theories to analyze the needs of Latin American community, to bridge research practice, and oftentimes to fix the disconnect between their professional and personal selves. Yet, it is important to recognize that many of these scholars have created and published new theories as a form of liberatory practice, as they have also seen and experienced rejection, oppression, and marginalization. At all levels of education, politics, economic, socially, historically, and cultural, voces de poder have the power to silence and suppress voces perdidas. Moreover, another act of resistance from scholars of color, is particularly those that are multilingual, includes publishing in Spanish, making their scholarship and activism accessible to a larger segment of the Latinx diaspora. Publishing in Spanish provides a voice for Spanish-speaking communities who currently do not have access to scholarship in Spanish, whose lived experiences are not acknowledged or captured in the media, and who have by large been marginalized and forgotten by academia. For example, 74% of the scholarship published across the world is published in English. And oftentimes we focus that Latin American communities in other countries are not educated. For an example is that in many of these countries outside of the United States, to earn a doctorate degree, they have to write their dissertation in their native language, and on top of that, publish 3 peer-reviewed publications in English. Student affairs and higher education needs to create spaces for individuals to write and receive their lived experiences in various ways and validate their work, talent, and skills when writing in various languages. In my case, in Spanish language. In her work, Gloria Anzaldúa wrote poetry in Spanish to characterize and illustrate her pain and lived experiences in 2 worlds. Inspired by her work, I write in Spanish to illustrate how the lived experiences of Latin Americans in education have been invisible. Parallel to Bell Hook, I write in Spanish because I'm hurting. The pain with me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory or Spanish poetry, desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what's happening around and within me. Como profesor les pido perdón. La academia se olvidó de nosotros, nos ignoró, nos engañó. Nuestra historia, nuestra cultura y tradición siguen en su poder, se enriquecen con lo nuestro, deciden nuestra historia e intervienen en nuestro destino. Es por eso que escribo en español nuestra lengua, para documentar y expresar nuestras ideas, nuestros sentimientos, nuestro dolor. Porque es mi sueño que las voces de poder, aquellas que opacan y matan, no nos vuelvan a borrar jamás. Que nunca más se pierdan nuestras voces, nuestra tradición, nuestra identidad como se perdieron en el pasado. Que aún en este mundo lleno de guerra y miseria, nuestras voces sigan inyectando un poco de fantasía cada día para no morir de tanta realidad. Al morir una voz se lleva historia, futuros, cultura y tradición. Cada palabra que se va sin publicar se lleva consigo ganas de expresar, luchar, cantar, llorar y amar y soñar. Pero incluso la voz más fuerte y llena de poder se espanta cuando oye el eco de las voces unidas del rugido de un pueblo que se levanta. Scholars, educators, and administrators of student affairs need to decolonize academia to create a social transformation for marginalized communities of people. I hope this poem sparks the conversation and interest of how research and practice can move away from English dominance into an appreciation of multilingualism and various ways of knowing. I hope this poem inspires others to write and promote other languages as a method of healing, to fight a system that has erased history, stories, knowledge, emotions, and many lived experiences that we are living today. Thank you.